channel. So today I'm going to go through my 2024 makeup stats. I've written down a few that I thought might be interesting, but you know, there's clearly plenty here that I could be discussing. What I've tried to do is compare to where I was this time last year, because as geeky as I am, I do keep a spreadsheet of everything that I do in terms of like eyeshadow palettes. This is like eyeshadow stats, not necessarily makeup stats, just FYI. But I do keep a spreadsheet. I've been doing it for several years now, and up until the point of like the end of 2023, I kept that spreadsheet as is, and I just duplicated it and then updated it as I went for this year, so I can literally compare where I was at the end of last year versus where I am now, which I will do next year too, because you know, I'm a nerd and that's what I like to do. I like to have a spreadsheet. So anyway, let's get into a few of the makeup stats that I have that might be of interest if this interests you. So this is in no particular order. I wasn't sure what would be the most interesting to talk about, but let's start with pan percentage. So obviously there's still a few weeks left of the month, so I could hit pan on any shade that I'm working on this month, but I'm just going to take the stats as I have them now. So now my pan percentage is 8.19%. That doesn't include any new eyeshadow palettes that I will be having in my collection this month, because I did end up ordering quite a bit during Black Friday, so I know that I will have quite a few new eyeshadow pans that I will need to add to my spreadsheet, and then my total pan will increase and my pan percentage will go down. But as of right now, my pan percentage is 8.19%. I have 94 pans in my collection, and I have 1,148 pans in total. So hopefully the math is mathing. I mean, I think that's right. So this is a little bit down from where I was last year. Most of it is because I did end up decluttering palettes that had pans in them this year, just simply because I had to, or I ended up depotting them and losing the pan. So there's a little bit of that. Also, I obviously have an updated collection, and I have palettes in my collection now that I didn't have last year. So I have quite a few newer palettes, and then last year I had these older palettes that I've ended up decluttering. So there's a little bit of a mishmash of data. But where I was last year, my pan percentage was 8.71%. I had 106 pans, and my total pans was 1,217. So I had about 50 more eyeshadow pans in my collection, but I also had hit more pans in my collection, if that makes sense. So, you know, it is what it is. I'm not too fussed about that. It was such a shame being like having to declutter certain palettes from my collection. I did a declutter series the end of last year, and I also did a declutter series spring of this year, sometime around then, and maybe one in the summer. I think I've done quite a lot. That's why I've not done anything this month, because I'm not ready to declutter. But I know I got rid of certain palettes that I love in my collection, but I had to let go because of the quality was really bad, or they just got ruined with mold, or I just didn't like them anymore, but they had certain pans in them. So that is definitely a factor, but they're still in the 8% range. So that's kind of where I'm tracking. I'm hoping for this next year I can hit 10%, but you know, knowing me, I don't actually know. I think ultimately I will be on a low buy this next year, just because I will be changing, like my lifestyle will change slightly. So I think I will have less to spend. And that's kind of a reason why I allowed myself to spend quite a bit this year. So I think I might end up going back on a more of a low buy and, you know, kind of limit what I bring in my collection, whereas this year I really have not. So it might actually, I might be able to get to 10% if I don't keep buying eyeshadow palettes, but you know, we'll see, because obviously my pan percentage is not actually 8.19%. When I get all of my new eyeshadow palettes this month, it's gonna go down. So I will start 2025 probably in the 7% range. Hopefully it's not 6%, like probably 7%, but anyway, we'll see. All right, my most used palette were both my Pan That palettes. So last year I had the e.l.f. Retro Paradise as my Pan That palette. I did end up decluttering this. There was just not many more shades that I really wanted to use. I felt like I used enough of the palette as is, and I let it go. So I will put up a picture of what it looked like at the end of last year if I can find it in a video. I don't really store a lot of my videos all that much, just because they're so huge. Like, the files are so huge. There's only so much storage that I can store. So I really try not to keep a lot of content, which, yeah, it is what it is. So that was the one that I used the most. I used it 185 times. So that's just how many uses I had in the shades in total. But obviously, you know, I might have gone into multiple shades in one day, but every time I went into a shade, it counts as a use. So it was 185 times that I have marked in my spreadsheet. And then this year, again, was my Pan That palette for the year. As you know, it's the Stone Vibes. So this one I've gone into 277 times. So I went into it almost 100 more times than the Retro Paradise, which makes sense because last year I did kind of stop my Pan That palette around September, October mark. I just had some personal things happening and I just couldn't really focus on project panning anymore. So I had a little bit less months to use the palette and I generally just lost focus. But honestly, this year I kind of lost focus on this one too. I want to say I gave it a really good run like the first 6 months, and then definitely like mid-year I slowed down. And anyway, I did my Pan That palette finale last week, so if you want to check that out. But yeah, this one used 277 times, which I think is pretty cool. So we'll see how many times I use my next Pan That palette for 2025. We'll see. Then I have my total times that I've actually dipped into an eyeshadow palette this year versus last year. So this is a little bit iffy because for the palettes that I pull from my Shop My Stash or any sort of side video or just random look that I do, I try to write down the shades or I try to remember which shades to mark it up at the end of the month. But I know that there are times when I just don't remember and I don't mark it up. So I do my best. Definitely the ones in projects I definitely track, but everything else is kind of a little bit iffy. However, I do have my total uses, like how many times I went into my eyeshadow palettes last year versus this year. So last year I went into 1,265 times. This year it's been 1,387. So I feel like I've been using quite a lot of eyeshadow this year. I don't know, or maybe I'm tracking it a little bit better. Who knows? But definitely it has picked up this year, and that is a good thing. I think also, yeah, maybe last year during the time when I was having some personal things, I probably wasn't tracking it and I probably couldn't care less about what I was putting on my eyes, or even probably wearing makeup every single day. So there's a little bit of like life things going on too, but I also know like this summer I barely wore makeup. So it is what it is. Okay, next up are the most used shades for the year. So this might be a little bit boring because I've already spoken about it, but my most used shade for this year is actually from my Urban Decay Stone Vibes. It's the Good Karma shade, and I finished it, so I couldn't up my game anymore. It was this one right here. It was just a plain light matte shade. It was basically my skin tone, and I used this 76 times. So that's how many times I used it this year alone. Obviously I had more use on it previous years too. So anyway, that is what was my most used shade for the year. Last year, it's so little. I guess I don't think I really, I mean, I do think I finished an e.l.f. Paradise shade, but it wasn't from that palette. It wasn't from my Pan That palette at all. I think also I had like when I rolled this in, I think I had a pan on it, but it just took a really long time to finish the shade. So that's why there's so much extra use. My most used shade last year was actually from a ColourPop palette. It's from the Honey palette. This was rolled into my project level 3, I think. Project pan, which if you don't follow that, you have to use every single shade depending on what level you're on, and also hit however many eyeshadow pans you need to hit. So it was my level 3, so I had to use every single shade in the 9-pan palette 3 times, and I had to hit 3 pans. And this was particularly hard because ColourPop is actually pretty hard to hit pan on. It is not the easiest. So the one that took me the most, like my most used shade, let me just try to find it, was actually the shade Buzzkill, which I remember really just was not fun. And it is, if I'm not mistaken, let me just double check the back, because I do have them written in the back. I'm pretty sure it's this one. So I'll just show you right here. This is Buzzkill right here. So it is this matte, grungy, yellowy mustard shade. It's a lovely shade, but you have to use it over and over and over again to hit pan just drove me a little bit nuts. I mean, it's a very monochromatic palette, the Honey, which I have all here. I don't think I got rid of any of the shades when I did my declutter of ColourPop pans. Yeah, I think I kept all of them, but that one I only used 26 times. So 26 times versus 76, definitely up my game this year in terms of my most used shade. So yeah, I thought that was interesting. Okay, next up we've got the color that has the most pans in it. So obviously I hit pan in, you know, shades throughout the year, and in my spreadsheet I have what color they are. So I can see how many like different blues I hit or how many greens I hit and everything. And so this basically is telling us the color that I've hit the most pans in for the year. So this year, actually for both years, I have two colors with the same exact amount of pans, but they're completely different like year on year. So let's talk about last year. Last year, it was actually yellows and purples. Very surprising to me, but also I do remember I had my Nomad Fête de Provence, which I had to get decluttered because it just went bad. And I had a few other Nomad palettes where I was hitting pan in a lot of those yellows. Also, the Honey, I hit 3 pans in that one. They were all considered yellow in my spreadsheet. So it makes complete sense that this was a total of 8. So last year I hit 8 pans that were yellow, and I also hit 8 pans that were purple last year too. So purple and yellow, they kind of go together, very spring-like. I actually really like that combination. And I know for a time I really was dipping into yellows quite a bit. So that makes sense to me. This year's a little bit different. So this year I've actually hit, it's a slightly lower number, it's 7. Whereas last year they were both 8. But I hit 7 green pans this year and 7 nude pans as well. Green kind of surprises me, but at the same time, I am working on my Beauty Bay Earthly palette, and I know straight away 3 of those are in there. So it also kind of makes sense. I'm trying to think of where the other ones are, but I can't for the life of me. I mean, maybe this one. I think I hit pan in Jade this year too, and that's green. Or maybe I already had a pan in it. I might have already had a pan in it. I don't really remember. But it's somewhere in it's in my spreadsheet. I just didn't write it for the purpose of this video. So very different shades, and it kind of just goes to show, you know, sometimes, you know, the shades that you go into every year do change quite often. So I thought that was interesting. And then my most used color is completely different. So last year it was brown. I went into brown 167 times. And this year it's nude. Oh my goodness, it's like almost doubled. I went into a nude 305 times. A lot of this would be from this palette alone, because obviously 76 of those uses were in this shade right here. But yeah, that's a huge difference. Kind of surprising, but I also did hit pan. I mean, this is not about hitting pan, but I did go into my Lethal Cosmetics a bunch of times and I ended up hitting pan, and that is considered a nude. Anything that's very light and like a lid setting shade or just any beige sort of light shade, I consider it a nude. So yeah, those are different too. And then I want to look at my least used colors that I've been dipping in, and they're not black. So black in both years, I've gone into it more than this shade. So last year I went into gray only once, at least that I marked down. Again, this does, you know, you have to caveat, you know, this is, obviously there's user error, but I've written down I only went into gray once last year. This year I've gone into 11 times. So they're both still my least used eyeshadow shade, but I definitely upped my game this year. And so that's pretty cool. I think a lot of it comes from the Gloss Gods Gal on Jupiter because I really like that palette, and I went into a few of the grays in there, and there's probably some other grays somewhere else that I went into that I don't recall right now. Okay, then I wanted to look at my top brands. So because a lot of my use is centered around my Pan That palette, this is excluding my Pan That palette. So the top 2 brands that I use this month versus last year, and excluding obviously Urban Decay or Elf, because they were like the 2 dominant when I looked at my spreadsheet, because they were my Pan That palette, so it makes sense. So last year is actually ColourPop was my #1 brand that I went into, and that kind of makes sense just because a lot of those palettes were rolled into projects. I do still have a lot of my ColourPop pans, but they're all in a single palette now, but last year they were all in the individual palettes. And it just made sense because I had quite a lot of them. So I went into ColourPop 193 times last year. The second most used brand last year was Huda Beauty, and I went into that 170 times, so quite high up there too. And I know quite a few of those were also rolled into projects, so it makes sense. So I've only got 3 Huda Beauty palettes. My Naughty Nude was definitely rolled into a project level project. And I also did dip my hands into, wait, did I say I have 3? I only have 2 Huda Beauty, right? I think I only have 2. Am I just forgetting one? No, I think I only have 2. I only have 2 Huda Beauty. That's quite a lot. I've got the Mercury Retrograde and I've got the Naughty Nude. I don't think I have any others, unless I've gone completely blank. I think that's it. Okay, anyway, really big numbers though. I think most of them went into my Naughty Nude because I do have more use on that one, but I do have pans on my Mercury Retrograde. This year, the 2 top brands that I've gone into the most, #1, if you know me, you know I talk about this brand all the time. It didn't surprise me that I've gone into it so much this year, but it was Gloss Gods. Not quite as high as my total uses for ColourPop last year, so still lower down, but I went into Gloss Gods 162 times. That doesn't really count this month because I haven't really done like the last week's totals. So still, that's pretty high. I do have lots of palettes from Gloss Gods though. I think it's the brand where I have the most amount of palettes now. I think it's above ColourPop, to be fair. I didn't actually track that. That would have been interesting just to see what my numbers are, but I could do that maybe in a different video. But yeah, I went into 162 times. And then the second most used brand this year has been Alter Ego, where I have 3 different palettes, and that one's 149. So both of them are actually slightly lower than last year, but I don't mind. It doesn't bother me. I like that they're different. I like that year-on-year comparisons are completely different. This video might not be interesting for anyone but myself, but I'm putting it out there anyway. It is what it is. And I do want to do it next year because I think it'll be interesting to see where I am this next year compared to now. You know, like, where am I? I have 2 more stats to share, and then I think this is probably enough, but if there's any more that you want to hear about, I can do probably separate videos or maybe include it next time. So my highest used until pan. So this is eyeshadows that I've hit pan either within 2024 or 2023, the highest amount it took for me to hit that pan. So the longest amount basically. And these 2 are both matte shadows. I'm not surprised at all. And I'm not surprised by what they are when I looked at this. It was kind of what I was thinking in my head. So we've already spoken about Buzzkill, but this one was the one that took me the longest to hit pan in last year. Now, the total amount of uses that I had to hit pan is higher than the amount that I actually went into it last year, if that makes sense, because obviously I had some use for it in 2022. So it actually took me 32 uses total to hit pan in Buzzkill, and obviously 26 of those were from 2023. But yeah, this shade right here again. So that one took me the highest amount of use last year, 32 times. I'm not surprised. I was so sick of the shade. I was really hate panning it at that point because it was a nice shade, but after a while you just don't want to do mustard yellow looks. I mean, you know, I like to have a variety, so I went through a good couple of months of just having yellow mustard looks, and I was very, very upset. This year it is another matte, like I said. It's actually from my Pan That palette, the Stone Vibes, and it is the shade Hexed, which is the last pan that I just hit in this palette, which is right here. This took me 35 uses in total to hit pan, but I didn't actually go into it 35 times oh, maybe I did. No, I think it was a little bit less. I put my totals in my last video. I don't really recall. But anyway, so it makes sense to me because I generally hit pan in shimmer shadows easier than I would a matte, and I mean, for the most case, isn't everybody like that? Or maybe it's just me, I don't know. So that made complete sense. And then the last stat that I have to share is last year I ended up having a lot of palettes in my collection that I did not end up going into at all for the year. And you know, I did like my most neglected palettes. This year I actually haven't been able to do that video because, pat on the back, there's literally one palette that I have not gone into this year alone. Like, this obviously excludes singles at this point, but I have obviously gone into all my singles, and in my spreadsheet I still have them marked as single, but also I know what palette they were from. And I have gone into my ColourPop multiple times this year because I always have a shade rolled into my Pan Nose eyeshadows as like a focus shade. So, you know, it's like, you know, I've gone into everything, but this one palette that I will share with you, which is this one. This is a Gloss Gods palette, and I have not gone into it at all this year. This is like my top 2 favorite palette of all time, and I have not touched it this year. I'm so upset about that. But you know what? It's more of a spring summer, and I just don't really want to like force myself to go into it when I don't really want to. So this is the Look for Rainbows palette you can see. I mean, I could technically do more of a wintry look. I'm doing a lot of blue looks at the moment, and I could definitely incorporate this into a look so that I could be like, hey, I used all of my eyeshadow palettes this year. But I want to be real with you, I don't have any interest in going into this at this point, but I do think this is so stunning, and it's one of their all shimmer palettes, so if you're not into those, you probably won't like it, but I love this. But I haven't got into it at all this year. That is shocking. But every single other palette in my collection, I've gone into it at least once, which I'm very, very, very happy with myself. This time last year, I had 16 palettes in my collection that I had not touched by the end of the year. That is a huge difference. And I definitely have made it my mission this year, even if I go into a palette for one little look or one little shade, I've allowed myself to do that and maybe pulled back a little bit from the actual projects that I have, because I don't want my collection to just sit and rot, especially because I know there's a lifespan of certain products where I can't keep them for like 5 years. I just can't in this climate. They just won't last. So I don't want eyeshadow palettes to just not be used, not be touched, and then eventually I have to chuck them because they go bad. And I know it's always like the case where we have big collections and we struggle with using what we have, but I am so proud that I only have one palette that I can say I literally neglected this, but I didn't neglect anything else. And definitely will go into it this next year. So I'm really, really pleased with that. And that's it. That's all I have for you for like my little makeup stats end of year sort of roundup video. I don't know, let me know if this interests anyone. I still need to do my makeup inventory. I'm kind of waiting still for a lot of things that I bought during Black Friday. So I don't really want to film that before I get an influx of new products. So I'm waiting for some new items to come in, and then I will hopefully try to film that at some point. It might be either this side of the year or right at the beginning of January. I'm not entirely sure, but I've got that one. Obviously need to update you on some other bits and bobs. But yeah, I thought this was interesting, and I'm definitely gonna do it next year. Whether this video bombs or not, I still want to do it. So give me a thumbs up if you liked it, and thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all next time. Bye.